Hey guys, this is Al Heck from RenderReady.com, and today we're going to dive into body paint. We're going to take the bowling pin that we did in a prior tutorial that's already been unwrapped, and using our new layout, we're going to start bringing a body paint material in. I'm going to show you some of the more efficient ways to do body paint. There's a couple negatives to it, but overall it will make your workflow a lot faster, and it should get you really comfortable with body paint and the way it works. Alright, so we have this bowling pin from a prior tutorial. We're going to go ahead and delete this material. And a couple of things we're going to need is we have, let me delete that tag. I want to get this type of realism from our bowling pin. And if you notice, a couple things that separate it is the fact that most bowling pins, of course, are not clean and pure and perfect. They have a lot of dings and scratches, but they also have logos on them, and a lot of the 3D bowling pins lack logos. So what we're going to do is, instead of jumping right into body paint, I like to start by adding textures on top of it. And go ahead and create a new material, and we're just going to drop in our texture. And so for this, I provided a seamless texture. We're just going to go ahead and drop that onto our bowling pin just like that. And then we'll call this white. We'll create a second color, red. And in here, all we're going to do is go to our layers, and inside layers we're going to add another color. And we're going to make this like a really dark red. And we'll set this to multiply. So it'll still have that texture, but it won't be this bright white color. And in it, what I already did, which you'll probably want to do, is I created, let's see, let me pull up my user layout, because I have this loop selection tool which I use all the time. The original cut, this part was too wide, so I ended up bringing in a knife tool, and I went to the plane mode, and I added a line right here and added a cut into the geometry, which won't affect the shape of the UV. It'll just add another group of polygons in our UV. So I ended up adding that cut so I can reduce the size of the width of these polygons that I selected, so that they're pretty much even from this perspective. And then I'm just going to take my red and I'm going to drop it onto these selections, and so it's going to create a set selection tag, and it's going to drop our bowling pin line on here. Now, the last thing we really need to do is we should probably add a bump channel. So a bump channel in the red and the bump channel in the white. And if you hold shift and you select your bump, you can drop both textures onto here. So you can drag it from your color, hold shift, and drop it into your bump channel. And so that way, when you zoom in, you can see that now our bump channel, let's see if I can exaggerate this a little bit. Yeah, you can see our bump channel is pretty prevalent at this point. So I'm going to leave these exaggerated for right now, and then we'll adjust these in a little bit. So we also need to add a base here. So I'm going to go ahead and create, I can even create a third color here, brown or gray, whichever you prefer. So let's go here like that, and then I'm going to select these polygons and press U and W to connect all of them, and I'm going to drop this new texture. And let's take a look at that. Okay, so we have our bowling pin textured like how we normally would do it in Cinema 4D without body paint, and it looks pretty good. Now, if we want to use body paint on this, though, we can't have 3 textures. It's a really bad thing because Cinema wants to lock onto one particular texture and do all our painting in it. So if we start doing anything with, let's say, this brown or this red texture, our paint is only going to consist on those 2. And if we start doing anything with this one texture, it may ignore the other 2 that are stacked on top of it. And, you know, there may be a way to get around it, but it just gets really complicated, really disorganized. It's almost better to just bring them all down to one material and work on one material. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go to Object, and we're going to go to Bake Object. Here are some of the options. So illuminate, you don't need to do that in baking, and it really increases your time. What it would do is it will take into your account your entire scene and take those shadows and everything like that and bake it on to your texture, but it really drastically increases the amount of time that you need to render it. And if you're doing a texture for like a video game or something else, and you know you're going to light the scene anyway, adding additional shading that's baked in may not be what you want. But if you know that you're not going to use any lights in a particular scene and you want all your lighting there, you're going to want to use Illuminate to do that. Single texture, so this just splits up multiple textures, and what I mean by splitting up is right now we have our ambient occlusion and we have our normals. So when we hit bake, we're going to get a color which is already set by default, and then we're going to bake out an ambient occlusion, and we're going to bake out our normals, which is going to take our bump map into consideration. Now, super sampling. What is super sampling? Super sampling is kind of like it's supposedly the anti-aliasing in baking, but it really does a pretty poor job right now, unfortunately. Hopefully in future versions they're going to fix that. Pixel border, really important to use pixel border. What this is that if you hit bake, wherever the seams are, it will add an additional pixel to connect those seams. And super sampling is really important with this. So I'll show you an example without it and then with it. So I got my location set and ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit bake. And you can see it goes really quickly. Now let me show you what you get. You get your ambient occlusion, which you could see it's working right down here. We just don't have a lot of ambient occlusion. We have our normal channel, which works really well. You can see all the detail inside of it. And then we have our texture channel, which bakes out really well. The biggest issue is right here in this area. We don't really get much anti-aliasing at all when it comes to laying textures on top of textures and then baking them down into one. Unfortunately, there isn't a fix yet, but I'm sure in time there will be. But just to let you see that this is going to be an occurrence. But it is also, in my opinion, significantly easier to throw in textures and then bake them down so that they're straight rather than trying to paint the straightest line you possibly can in body paint. So the next thing I want to show you is if I hit render right here, you see this seam. This is where our body paint seam is. We don't want this body paint seam. So if we increase our super sampling to, let's say, 2 and hit bake, it's going to slow, oops, and you know what? And the reason why it didn't work is I already baked and it created a duplicate. But let's hit bake. Now you can see how things are slowing down significantly. I think the first render of this bowling pin took us maybe 3 seconds. This one will take a little bit longer. Okay, so this bake took us 40 seconds to do. Now, if I hit render, though, do you see the seam? It's gone. And that's what pixel border and super sampling are going to do, is they're going to take care of that. Now, again, here's that rough anti-aliasing of the 2 on top of each other, the textures. So here's our bowling pin. This is our one material bowling pin that's been baked in, okay? So how do we dive into body paint? Well, now we just go to our provided layout and we want to start painting onto here, but we can't yet. It doesn't show up. All we do is go to materials, and you see these X's right here? We want to go find the bowling pin one. That was the new one that was created on this material that's showing, and just turn that on. Now you can see that our color, our diffusion, and our normals channels have all been placed into the body paint cache, and we are able to kind of move forward and do anything we want to in body paint. Don't mess with this wizard button. We've already done all the work there. The only things we're going to concern ourselves with are these buttons, and now our paint menu buttons over here, our layers, and our projection over here. So there's two types of ways to paint in body paint. First of all, there's the typical UV route. Okay, so the best, let me find this scene. Here we go. All right. And this is really a good way to describe what's happening. Okay, so right here is our layers palette. This is kind of like Photoshop. We can add more layers or take layers away. Now I can draw in a 2D mode by just clicking and dragging right across on the 3D scene, or this camera view right here, and it will connect, if I draw in this area, from one end to the other seam and kind of carry on through. Or I can draw in this area right here, but you could see how we're having an issue with the seam right here, because in the UVs these aren't connected. So that is the first way to draw or paint in body paint. The second way to body paint is this button right here called projection painting. Once you click that, these other ones get enabled. And in here, I can't projection paint in this window anymore. This is just our 2D UV. But in here, I can draw across, and this is really important to see. I want you to see how this works around the edges. If I hit that, and then I got to make sure I hit the apply projection, you see how the brush now warps and it stretches, because as I've drawn, it's actually projecting the paint onto the material rather than just kind of drawing on the opposite direction the normal is facing on this material. So with this projection, if you want to lay this logo down on it and you want it to wrap around, this may be one of the best ways to do it. So first thing we want to do with this particular bowling pin is we want to fix this seam. Some of you may be able to see it, some maybe not, but I want to show you how easy it is to fix a seam. Sometimes they're a little bit more noticeable, like right around here. You could see the edge up here, and there's an edge and a line right down here. This is why I don't worry myself about these, because all I have to do is go to projection mode. I have to select where we're projecting, of course, projection mode, and then I go to my clone tool, and just like Photoshop, I'm going to left click and I'm going to paint in on the seam, and I'm basically going to hide all my seams using a cloner tool. Anything that looks odd is an easy fix. So if I hit render, you won't be able to see any seams anymore. So if I find where this seam is right here, and with render you can kind of see the seam at this point in this area, I can now take this brush, hide this bizarre edge right here, get some nice stuff going. So the seam practically becomes invisible. So that's how you get rid of seams on this bowling pin right here. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a logo. So I'm going to lock on to this particular area. And in my artwork, I have this Cinema 4D logo. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, drop this into Photoshop. Then I'm going to copy, select all, copy, and then go back to Cinema 4D. And then I'm going to go to projection mode, and I want to select a new, or I'm going to actually get off of projection mode. I'm going to make sure I create a new layer. Back to projection mode, and I'm going to hit paste. And then I'm going to apply my bowling pin. Oops. And just keep in mind, whenever you move, it places it onto the scene. And we don't want to do that yet. So I'm going to double click, and then I'm going to go to my select tool. And I'm just going to select the black areas. Then go to filter. We want to grow our selection by 1, and we want to feather that selection, and then go ahead and cut that out. And you know, in the past I was able to actually just paste it straight on with alpha. I don't know why it's not working right now, but eventually I'll figure it out and it'll come back to me. I'm like, oh, that was that simple. But since it's not working right now, you got to find another way, right? So right here, I'm just going to erase this edge. Okay. There we go. That looks pretty legit. And then we want to hit apply projection. And that's going to apply the projection onto the side of this bowling ball or bowling pin. And then what we can do, once we get out of projection mode, let's say, you know, this particular logo is too strong, you can do Photoshop tricks to this. You know, you can set this to multiply, or you know, let's duplicate this. So duplicate layer, and if I set this to, let's say, a normal, but I only want it to be, I don't know, 36%, and then I can turn this layer on, so I have a little bit of white, and then I could bring this down a little bit on a multiply, so it kind of takes in some of the opacity. Then you have yourself a really nice version of your bowling pin. So now that we're out in this area, Nick Campbell showed a really interesting concept about instead of using color and reflectance channels differently, use them in the same area. So if we take our current reflectance channel, create a new diffusion, and in our diffusion pass we drop in this texture. Let me make sure I can get that correct. Bam. I can turn off the color channel, go back to reflectance. Now you want to make sure your sampling is up high, maybe like 7, otherwise it's going to get kind of noisy, right? And then we can have a reflection on top with maybe a little bit of roughness, not so much strength in the reflective area, and possible Fresnel. And then let's see, let's go ahead and add. So here's our HDR. We're going to go create a new material, and in that new material we're going to drop that HDR into this channel and create a new sky. Drop this into the sky. In compositing, turn off scene by camera. Let's hit render and see how this looks. Yep, and then you know, we can add a couple quick lights. So let's do an inverse square light with some shadow. We'll put this on one end. We'll create a second light. Or if you have a light kit or a studio kit, you can use that as well. And it was really easy to create a body painted texture and also incorporate your bowling pin in an environment. So that was a quick introduction to body paint. Hopefully it wasn't very painful. Hopefully it was very quick. And let me know if you have any questions. This is Al from RenderReady.com, and thank you again for your time.